Honor was never part of this. "Don't destroy your brother over a mistake," he pleaded. "He's all I have left." Watching him shake on the floor, I finally understood the truth of who my father really was. What I was seeing wasn't strength, it was the illusion of power that comes from an empty wallet. For my entire adult life, Jonathan had played the role of the family's backbone. But that authority had been rented, not earned, and the rent had always been paid with my money. He wasn't a leader. He was a tenant in a life he couldn't afford without me. Without my resources propping him up, he wasn't a father anymore. He was just an accomplice in a long-running fraud. Tyler didn't beg. He snapped. His face twisted with something wild and ugly. "You think you're better than us because of that badge?" he spat. "You're a traitor to your own blood." I didn't react. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a federal summons for money laundering and an order for the immediate seizure of assets Tyler had hidden under Low Country Logistics. "I already did what I needed to do for this family," I said, my voice flat and cold as a Charleston winter. "I stopped the rot. The rest belongs to the U.S. attorney." Then I stood and walked toward the door. My father's sobs followed me, but they were just noise by then. They weren't stunned by what they had done. They were stunned that I had finally stopped paying for it. The legal fallout was swift and final. The unauthorized $180,000 mortgage was officially voided. My mother's heirloom jewelry, the emerald earrings and the gold necklace she wore on her wedding day, was returned to its rightful place in my safe. Jonathan and Tyler didn't end up in orange jumpsuits, but their names were permanently entered into a federal fraud registry, and in Charleston, that kind of stain doesn't wash out. Tyler was ordered to repay every dollar of the $45,000 he'd taken as a management fee, a debt that would follow him for the rest of his life. One morning, not long after, I stood on my balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor. The early sun painted the water in bruised shades of purple and gold. The salt air felt different, lighter. Not weighed down by secrets, but clean with the clarity of an ending. For 32 years, I had been the dependable daughter, the one who softened her own success so no one else felt threatened by it. That version of me died in that windowless conference room. I finally understood something simple and necessary. Letting go of blood ties isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's survival. DNA is just a blueprint. Family is a contract built on respect and protection. The moment they forged my signature, they tore that contract apart. Cutting them out felt like removing shrapnel I'd been carrying since childhood. The pull hurt. But the relief afterward was complete. With Julia's help, I used the restitution funds to create the Lawson Legal Defense Fund. It provides pro bono legal aid to service members whose finances are compromised while they're deployed or stationed at the border. I didn't want my story to end with closed accounts and court filings. I wanted it to end with protection for the next person who's far from home while betrayal happens quietly behind their back. Now this house is finally still. The floorboards still creak. The smell of fresh paint still lingers. But the ghosts are gone. I don't need hidden cameras anymore. I learned how to guard my own boundaries. I am no longer a line item on someone else's balance sheet. I'm a woman who found her worth not in their approval, but in my own truth. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment when trust cracked or a boundary was crossed, share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. We tell these stories so no one has to carry them alone. There are more to come, real ones, difficult ones, human ones. So if you want to keep walking this road with us, subscribe and stay for the next story. We'll keep going, together. This wasn't just about gambling anymore. Tyler had been laundering money for a private lending group to cover his losses. And because my name was on the paperwork, I was the one the government would come for when the audit landed. I would be the one in handcuffs. Tyler would walk away with his $45,000 fee. Then I saw it. The witness line on the incorporation papers. My father's signature. Jonathan hadn't ignored Tyler's crimes. He had actively helped commit them. He knew exactly what my job required. He knew a clean record wasn't optional, it was survival. And still, he signed the document, effectively offering up my freedom to protect his favourite son from consequences. That was the moment everything ended. The bridge wasn't burned, it was vaporized. You don't negotiate with people willing to trade your life for their comfort. They hadn't just drained my accounts, they had targeted my future and pulled the trigger. They took a biological bond and turned it into a death sentence. I looked at Julia and told her to loop in the federal investigators I trusted at the Bureau. If they wanted a federal case, I was going to hand them one, clean, documented, and airtight. The municipal building was a maze of grey hallways and the sharp smell of industrial floor wax. Sterile, impersonal, perfect for what was about to happen. I arrived early with Julia at my side. The agents weren't in the room. They were sitting in a black SUV down the street, headsets on, listening through the wire taped to my skin. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a sting. My pulse sat at a calm 60 beats per minute. I wasn't here as a daughter. I was bait. Jonathan and Tyler showed up 5 minutes late. Tyler wore a designer shirt that probably ran $600, most likely paid for with the fee he'd stolen using my name. He leaned back in his chair, smug, relaxed, convinced he was minutes away from a payout. My father followed behind him, adjusting his tie, trying to resurrect the image of the protective patriarch. He actually smiled at me. "Glad we could settle this, Claire," he said. "Family should always handle things privately." I didn't smile back. Instead, I nodded to Julia. She placed a tablet in the center of the table and pressed play. Gary's living room filled the screen. The audio was crystal clear. They watched themselves talking about my recovery. They heard Tyler joke about my inheritance. They saw my father's steady hand forge my signature without hesitation. The silence afterward was suffocating. Jonathan's face drained from greedy pink to a sick, lifeless grey. Tyler's confidence evaporated, his foot starting a frantic tap beneath the table. You were spying on us," Jonathan whispered, his voice brittle and cracking. I looked at him the way I'd look at a suspicious shipping manifest, detached, precise. "I wasn't spying," I said evenly. "I was securing my property. You're the ones who chose to commit a crime in my living room." That's when the patriarch mask collapsed. My father slid down in his chair until his knees hit the linoleum floor. "Claire, please," he begged, tears filling his eyes in a performance that no longer worked. "Think about the family name, our honor. We'll pay it back." And that's when I finally understood something clearly. I leaned back in my office chair and looked out at Charleston Harbor. My grip on the phone was relaxed. My heartbeat stayed steady. "I never asked for a loan, Tyler," I said, "and I definitely didn't authorize my signature on a mortgage application." He scoffed, slipping smoothly into the gaslighting he'd clearly practiced. "See, that border assignment messed you up. You come home and suddenly everyone's a criminal. Dad was protecting your future. We're family. We share the burden." Then he went for the guilt. "You've gotten cold. Everything's a transaction to you now. It's pathetic. You're sitting on all that equity while the rest of us are barely staying afloat." He wasn't shocked by what he'd done. He was shocked that I'd stopped functioning as his personal vault. I didn't argue. I didn't waste time explaining identity theft to someone who thought crime was a family favor. I just told him I was willing to meet and fix the paperwork so he could get his money. I could practically hear his greed perk up through the phone. Then I called Julia. She was a specialized attorney who understood one basic truth. Blood isn't thicker than water. It's just a biological excuse people use to steal. We met in a glass-walled office overlooking the historic district. She didn't offer sympathy or soft words. She offered proof. "The mortgage signatures are forged, Claire," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "They didn't go through a traditional bank. That would have taken months. Instead, they targeted a predatory private lender, a hard money firm that specializes in high-interest bridge loans. She explained that those lenders only care about collateral. They promised a 14-day payout because they had my house as a backstop and a forged signature from a federal agent to greenlight the risk. Then she dropped the second blow. They didn't stop with the house. Our investigators found another filing. Tyler used your name to secure a private high-interest loan using your mother's heirloom jewelry as collateral. He's already taken $45,000 from that as a management fee. She looked at me evenly. They've turned your entire life into a liquidation sale. I rubbed my eyes, searching for even a trace of regret. There was none. Only clarity. This wasn't a family problem. It was a hostile takeover. Julia prepared the formal notice, but we didn't serve it at my father's house. I wanted neutral ground. Invite them to the title office at the municipal building, she said. Tell them you're ready to sign the final release on the $180,000. And that's when the trap was set. We needed them somewhere official, where every signature mattered and cameras were impossible to avoid. So I sent a single message to the family group chat. Meeting at the municipal building. Thursday, 10 a.m., finalizing the paperwork. Be there if you want the money. Jonathan reacted with a heart within seconds. Tyler followed right behind him with, "About time, sis." The day before the meeting, Julia asked me to come back to her office. This time, she didn't look like a lawyer. She looked like someone about to pull the lever. "It's worse than the jewelry in the house, Claire," she said, her voice dropping into that quiet register reserved for news that permanently alters your life. Tyler had broken into my home office. He stole copies of sensitive financial documents and the personal identity records tied to my federal security clearance. "He didn't just steal money," Julia said. "He hijacked your professional identity." Tyler had used my credentials to vouch for his shady transactions, fooling monitoring systems into thinking the income belonged to a legitimate government employee. He even set up a shell company, Low Country Logistics, and listed me as the sole owner and CEO. My digital signature had been forged on documents authorizing the movement of nearly $300,000 over the last 6 months. They were borrowing $180,000 against my home's equity to cover Tyler's gambling debts. Tyler even mentioned a $45,000 broker fee he planned to pocket for setting up the private lender himself. I closed the tablet and slid it back to Gary. I didn't feel shattered. I felt honed, like a blade that had finally found its edge. The compassion I'd shown them for years had been a resource they drained dry. And that night, I declared their version of family officially insolvent. This wasn't about revenge. It was about bookkeeping. Sitting alone in my car in the dark diner parking lot, I opened my laptop. I didn't call them. I didn't fire off a single angry message. Instead, I logged into every shared account. I reset every password. I stripped my father of emergency power of attorney. I placed a fraud alert on my credit and flagged the pending mortgage application as compromised. They weren't going to be stunned by what they'd done. They were only going to be stunned that I'd finally stopped letting it happen. As the sun started creeping up over the harbour, my laptop screen glowed with a different kind of dawn, one built from facts, figures, and quiet consequences. Later that morning, I walked through the empty rooms of my new house. The floorboards echoed under my steps, hollow and sharp, sounding exactly like the space they'd left behind in my chest. For 32 years, I had been the dependable one. I was the kid who did everything right, whose achievements only mattered because they made life easier for everyone else. It finally hit me that my role had never really been daughter or sister. I was a resource, one they'd been strip mining for most of my life. I thought back to when I was 10 and Tyler was 6. I saved my allowance for months to buy a special science kit, the kind that made me feel like the future was wide open. When I finally brought it home, Tyler lost it because he wanted a new video game instead. My father, Jonathan, didn't tell him to wait or learn patience. He took my science kit back to the store, got a refund, and used the money to buy Tyler's game. "You're smart, Claire," he told me, wearing that calm, practiced smile. "You don't need a kit to succeed. Tyler needs this win. Family helps family." That became the rule. My strength was never treated as something that belonged to me. It was an asset, something to be redistributed to whoever needed it more. When I joined the customs agency, my father's emergencies started piling up. Medical bills insurance supposedly wouldn't cover, property taxes on his house that were suddenly overdue. I never asked for repayment. I honestly believed I was buying love. Now I could see it for what it really was. A subscription. I paid every month, and they enjoyed the benefits. The psychology behind what they did was actually simple. In my line of work, we'd call it a systemic breach. In human terms, it's normalized cruelty. My father didn't think of himself as a thief. In his mind, he was just redistributing wealth. Because I was strong, they believed I could absorb unlimited loss. They spent years convincing themselves my survival was guaranteed, which meant my money was fair game. To them, stealing $180,000 wasn't a crime. It was just a withdrawal from an account they felt entitled to control. At 2 p.m, a text from my father popped up. "Claire, Tyler says you're having trouble with the accounts. Let's talk it through like a family." I didn't respond. I was too busy watching the digital defenses I'd built around my finances do exactly what they were supposed to do. Then Tyler called. I let it ring 3 times before answering, making sure my recorder was running. "What's your problem, Claire?" No greeting, no hesitation. Straight to the accusation. "I put weeks of work into setting up that $180,000 line of credit for you. Now you've frozen everything. I've got bills. That $45,000 profit is mine. I earned it managing the deal while you were off playing soldier at the border." About a week after we finished moving into our new place, my phone buzzed at exactly 9:17 that night. The guy on the other end didn't say his name, didn't ask how the house was treating us, didn't bother with small talk at all. All he said was, "I forgot to disconnect the living room camera." He stopped talking just long enough for my gut to sink. Then he went on, slower now. "I'm really sorry to bother you like this. I was about to delete the old security app from my phone when it sent a motion alert from your living room. I thought it might be a break-in, so I opened the live feed." He took another breath. "What I saw instead was your father and your brother forging paperwork on your dining table." He told me he'd saved the footage before officially transferring the account credentials. "I saw what your dad and your brother did," he added, "and while you were on base, they didn't stop." I stood there in my kitchen with the phone still warm against my ear. In the next room, my wife was breaking down cardboard boxes, the steady scrape and fold sounding like the heartbeat of a life I thought we'd finally secured. But in that moment, everything tilted sideways. Gary, the previous owner, was a man in his late 50s who'd seemed almost eager to wash his hands of this house. Without meaning to, he had just handed me something dangerous, leverage I didn't even know I was missing. Years working as a customs agent had prepared me for situations exactly like this. When there's a breach, you don't lose your head. You lock things down, you evaluate the threat, and then you shut it down completely. Before I get into how I took their whole operation apart, I want to know who's listening in today. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. It's always a reminder that nobody has to fight this stuff alone. I didn't break down. I didn't yell into an empty room or demand answers from the universe. This kind of anger wasn't explosive. It was controlled, precise, like a spreadsheet that refused to balance. My father, Jonathan, and my brother Tyler, the 2 people I'd quietly financed since I turned 18, had finally crossed a line they couldn't come back from. They had burned through the last of my loyalty, and there was no overdraft protection left. I grabbed my keys and left a short note for my wife. It said something vague about a late-night call from the port. It wasn't true, but in my line of work, you learn fast that the first report is never the full story. I met Gary at a 24-hour diner just outside Charleston. The smell of burnt coffee and harsh floor cleaner felt more honest than what I was about to see. He looked exhausted, like sleep hadn't come easy in days. Without saying a word, he slid a tablet across the table. His hands shook just enough to notice. He didn't explain anything. He didn't need to. The video loaded with a low, grainy buzz. And there they were. My father, 62 years old. My younger brother, 28. Standing in my living room, the same room where I'd planned to host our first family Thanksgiving. Jonathan held a manila folder, his back straight with borrowed authority. Tyler was stretched out in my new armchair, wearing that familiar smirk I'd unknowingly paid for over the last 2 decades. "She won't notice," Tyler said, his voice clear through the tablet speakers. "She's stationed at the border for another 3 weeks. By the time she checks the title, the money will already be gone." My father hesitated. For a split second, I thought I saw guilt. But it wasn't guilt. It was calculation. $180,000 is a lot to repay, he muttered. Tyler laughed, sharp and careless, slicing through the quiet diner. "It's not a loan, Dad. It's an advance on her inheritance," he said. "She's tough. She'll bounce back." I watched my father sign my name. No pause. No second thoughts. He traced my signature like someone who'd practiced it more than once.